of Architecture, Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Technology, Kerala. Dr. Binimol has completed her bachelor's in architecture from College of Engineering, Trivandrum, and her master's from School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi, and pursued her PhD from JNTU, Hyderabad. She has been an integral part of various prominent conservation projects, such as SOBI project of Intact Delhi, conservation of mural paintings of Cheriyapalli Tarthangadi, and also played a significant role as a conservation expert, documentation, report preparation and listing of heritage buildings of numerous distinguished government undertaken projects. She owns more than 22 years of experience of both being an architect and an academician in various government colleges. She has also proved her flair as an author, and her two books were published by Intac UK Trust and IIA Trivandrum, which focuses on areas like conservation and heritage. She has deliberated in various national and international forums and also an improved guide for PhD programs. Dr. Binimol is also an elected member among the heads of institutions to the Council of Architecture, New Delhi. We feel very honored and privileged to have you, ma'am, with us in spite of your busy schedule. Once again, I wholeheartedly welcome you to the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Dr. Mabel. Thank you for the nice introduction.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, participants, friends. I know that post-lunch is a difficult session to carry on, so I'll try my best to make the presentation interesting to you. I understand that we are all from various fields. Some of you must be from textile field, some of you from engineering field, and I'm from architecture. So, but basically we are all human beings. So there is a point where all of us meet. And there's a point where all of us have to think and transform ourselves, transform the family, transform the community, and maybe the region, and so on and so forth. And that's why I have titled the presentation towards sustainability, but a concept of biophilia, which is not a new concept, which has been instilled in us from time immemorial. Like, for example, just a minute, I'll just share my screen. Yeah. Those who are interested to know about the past, in one of our oldest Veda, Atharva Veda, there is a sloka which is very, touching. In fact, very inspiring for all of us. That particular sloka, when translated to English, it means that what I dig out of thee, O pure one, let it grow over. Let me not hit thy vitals nor thy heart. And the Veda presents the Holy One as Mother Earth, no one else other than Mother Earth. So it says that let me not dig thy vitals. And if whatever damage I make on you for my own existence, let it grow over, and let me not hit thy vitals nor thy heart. Well, this is Veda, it written so many centuries back. Then itself, our ancestors had a thinking or reverence for Mother Nature, understanding that our existence basically was, it's actually a product of how Mother Nature is taken care of. And now we know that the way in which we live and the needs that we have to meet, or the greeds that we have to meet, have taken us far away from Mother Nature. And maybe that is one reason for all these sorts of global warming and climate change and all the related climatic issues that we talk about. Then we have started thinking about sustainability, so on and so forth. So we know that the global climate, it's like, if you look at the global system of climate, it consists of the sun, the earth, the oceans, the wind, the rain, the snow, forest, deserts, the savannas, and everything including us. And we know the more we work on nature without allowing it to replicate, then that will lead to a lot of deleterious effects. For example, global warming. global warming, simply in simple terms, it is like, heat is an energy, and when we add that energy into an existing system, changes occur. And that is exactly what is happening. As we know, when it should rain, it doesn't rain. When it should be summer, it is not summer. So that kinds of climate changes already occurred. And we say, okay, fine, we are all comfortable within our houses, we are comfortable within our colleges or the workplaces where we work. But knowingly or unknowingly, this climate change is affecting us very badly. It's it's in fact a threat not only to the economic, social, and environmental stability, but also to all of us, because most of the prevalent diseases are kind of linked to climate fluctuations, whether it is cardiac issues, the kind of BP that people talk about and deal with, the cardiovascular mortality, respiratory illness due to heat waves, then the altered transmission of infectious diseases, malnutrition because of crop failure, and then you are forced to eat what is available in the market, which could be even adulterated, and diminished nutrition availability. Everything is connected to the way in which we live. So it's basically a byproduct of what we have done to nature. So it becomes very pertinent that as human beings, we have to understand that this climate change is an important factor, and we need to look at it. And what best we could do, not big changes, but small things that could add on to giving a better or a slowdown in the climate change, is what we should really look for. So if we look at the reasons for climate change, obviously all of us know because we have been talking about it. It could be the greenhouse effect, which is a natural phenomena, but the atmosphere around the earth is not in a position to not to get heated up because of our immense activity, which gives out carbon dioxide. Then obviously the fossil fuel depletion, the way in which we are making use of the fossil fuel, deforestation for habitat preparation, or maybe lots of other associated activities, intensive farming. In our childhood days, we would have learned about rotation of crops and all that, but now since the soil itself can be adulterated by giving enough and more nutrition that it requires for a particular kind of farming, and then not allowing that soil to heal on itself without without introducing rotation of crops, because there is a market that is waiting for this products from intensive farming, that is also changing the climate. Then over mining and overconsumption of resources. There is always a question: what is needed and what is your greed? I mean, I'm talking about all of us. So everything starting from the food, the textiles, the dresses that we wear, even my own field of construction, where there is overconsumption of resources, are all destroying our nature. And this is exactly where we need to look at this concept of ecological footprint. Maybe many of you would know what ecological footprint is. In very simple terms, it is the resources that I have used up or you have used up from the time you emerged in your mother's womb, the time and everything that you have consumed till now for your living and your education and your livelihood, converted into global hectares, is an ecological footprint. So I can actually calculate my ecological footprint based on the globally available ecologically productive area, which is required to make up all the resources, starting from the milk that I drank, the clothes that I wear, the newspaper that I read, the papers and notebooks I'm writing on. Everything comes from some ecologically productive area. So this concept tells us that we are predating or preying upon nature for our being, and then as individual, as a community, as a whole global population, we should understand that we are converting so much of ecologically sensitive areas into barren areas for our living and well-being, without understanding that if these are not replenished, then they might go, or we might not have a beautiful planet to live on. So all these overconsumption and increased ecological footprint has got a very bad effect on our nature. And why I have written construction industry is because that is the industry where I belong to, and I know that how much of overconsumption of resources happen in that industry. For example, I'll tell you, there is only one building material on this whole earth which gives out oxygen while it is produced, while all the other building material gives out carbon dioxide. For example, cement. Cement, to produce 1 ton of cement, approximately 1 ton of carbon dioxide has to be brought out for the production of 1 ton of cement. Everything that you look at, starting from the brick or the lime or the cement that we apply on the walls for strength as well as for plastering, the steel, aluminium, everything, the byproduct is carbon dioxide, except for timber, because that's what I said, there's only one building material that gives out oxygen while it is produced. We know that we harvest timber or timber grows on its own. We can plant them, and while they are planted, while they are growing, they take in carbon dioxide and give out oxygen through the process of photosynthesis. And that's why I proudly say that timber is only building material that gives out oxygen while it is produced as and cut as a wood. So every action of ours is affecting the nature by use up of the resources. There is this little story which maybe we would have heard when we were children. That's like we are all living in an exponential age. This is the best way in which you can explain to your students how we overuse our resources. So the story goes like this. There were two kings. They had a war, and finally, in any war, there is only one winner and the other person is a loser. So the winner king tells the loser that, okay, now since I am the emperor of your land too, of your country too, I will give you a last wish. You can ask me what you want. Anyway, you are, I have conquered you. So the king who lost the war, he was very clever. He said, I only need food grains. But there is one condition by which I would be given this food grain. And the condition is that it should be on a chessboard in the consistency that the first block or the first square should have 1, and then the second should be raised to, that is exponentially it should grow. And then this king said, okay, fine, I have lots and lots of grains, there shouldn't be any problem in giving you the grains based on the proportion you proposed on the chessboard. But the irony is that by the time the bags of grains were broken and counted, and the story it's a story, goes on like this, that the king could reach only up to half of the chessboard, and he realized that he has worn out of all the grains. So this is a perfect example to understand how exponentially things grow. Whether it is population, the moment population is exponentially growing, the resources that needs to sustain the need first and then the greed of the population increases exponentially. So if we keep on going and using up like this, then there is no other way other than say goodbye and then leave, or Mother Nature would actually just started giving us lessons, and maybe worse lessons would come from her. And why I say that the construction is very important, because it's an important economic activity, and it's a very most conspicuous economic activity. The moment a society's economic status increases, we do construction, demolition or construction on new sites, and every time construction happens, energy gets used up, resources gets used up, and then that resources is always drawn from nature, and nature is not being replenished with that energy that we are using up, or the resources that we are using up. So this is a conflict. Like when we talk about building industry, in order to create built up areas, you require water, sand, stones, lot of minerals in its crude form, or even in its advanced product forms, whatever everything. You cannot do anything out of nothing, right? You require some kind of raw material to create something out of the raw material. Nothing comes out of vacuum or nothingness. So the result is that there is depletion, exhaustion, damage to natural resources, total imbalance in the ecosystem, and then there is energy crisis. The World Watch paper states that in the building industry itself is responsible for 40% of world's total energy consumption, 30% of consumption of raw materials, 25% of timber harvest, 35% of world's carbon dioxide emissions, 16%. I'm not talking about ecological footprint, I'm only talking about the construction footprint. 16% of freshwater withdrawal, 40% of municipal solid waste, 50% of ozone depletion materials, so on and so forth. So it states that this is taken from a popular article that by 2030, if we need to sustain the way in which we are living, that's just 9 years ahead, the kind of load that we are putting on Mother Earth, if it has to be equally stabilized, then we would require 2 Earths. The way in which our ancestors lived, by reducing the consumption of resources, we have to live, then we would require 2 Earths. And by 2050, if this way in which we live goes on, the way our attitude doesn't change, we would require 3 Earths. So this is the ultimate thing that we could think of. Like, you know that there is only one Earth, and we cannot go for a second or a third Earth, basically. And after all, we are consuming a lot of things. We are privileged with so many luxuries, everything. Still, are we happier than before? I think apparently we are not happy at all. So, unmanaged consumerism actually contributes to a wide range of physical and psychological problems, depression, obesity. The moment the neighbor buys a better car, then again that stress builds up. Okay, mine is old, so I got to live up to the social image, so on and so forth. So then but we need to look at ourselves, what makes us happy and what makes us unhappy. And I always think, like, why should my happiness and unhappiness depend upon the other person's life, the lifestyle, behavior, whatever. So we urgently need to address this problem before we deplete Mother Nature. So we have thought of reviving construction industry by using naturally available materials, preservation of natural ecosystems, energy efficient design. Maybe from 1980s onwards, this realization happened. In 90s and 2000s. We have started separate pedagogical approaches for climate sensitive architecture, because all the while it was just trying to control the climate and create a better indoor climate. Then we realized, no, we have to come up with climate sensitive construction, climate sensitive architecture, healthy indoor environment, lot of use of eco-friendly building materials, water resource management. How do we manage the solid waste? Then use up of renewable energy. And then we learned we have to come up with smart construction and smart architecture. The building should respond to the external climate and change or transform the internal climate. We call them smart buildings. The buildings, they identify how much is the energy or the heat outside, and then how much heat is preferred by the people living inside, and then control it. But again, the whole question of whatever we have done is again, it has become an irony. In fact, I would say it has become a green laughter. Like, you have a green building, everything is rated perfectly fine, but to reach the green building, you got to spend so much of time, driving your car and then waiting in the queue to reach the green building. So what totally the building alone is green, but the environment around that building doesn't contribute to it. You are in the traffic signal, you are still burning out the fuel, fossil fuel depletion is happening. The way in which I think a pandemic has taught us a good lesson, that you can stay at home and teach, you can stay at home and work. So at least fossil fuels are getting, the way in which fossil fuels were burnt are getting reduced because of this, but we have a lot of other issues connected to this, which we will discuss later. And then another thing is like we have thought like, whatever you spit after, brushing your teeth should be filtered and then it should be used. I've just put it as a green laughter to just look at the irony in which things are happening around. Now again, you have a green building, but the only way to reach the green building is by, renting out a helicopter. Because we have not learned the most important aspect of designing a city or a town or even our own neighborhoods, that these buildings don't stand alone. They don't stand in isolation. They are part of a microcosm and then they are part of a macrocosm. So we have an immediate environment. We have our own individual building, the immediate environment which builds up to a neighborhood. The neighborhood builds up to a region. The region builds up to a metropolitan area, and then the whole continent, or the country, and then the continent, or maybe finally the universe. So it is not, identifying projects and then making them green alone. It is it should be a holistic approach towards creating the whole ecosystem green rather than contributing to one or two buildings. Again, my question is like, are we happy having some green buildings, having smart buildings? Are we happy? Maybe we are happy for some time. Still, we are unhappy. And to add to all this, for the past 2 years, we have been put in shells where pandemic has given us big lessons of lockdown. Maybe some of us have really learned how to enjoy this lockdown and still work, because people transform a lot. I mean, based on the necessity. So some of the lessons that this pandemic has taught us is that streets have become empty. In fact, most of the cities and towns, I'm not talking about the historical cities or towns, but most of the modern cities and towns, if you look at, you realize that these streets are all designed for motor vehicle. Where is the human component? We can't walk. In big cities, you cannot walk along even the pedestrian pathway because cars will be parked there. Otherwise, the policeman has to come and find the owner for parking the vehicle. Otherwise, there is no social consciousness that the pedestrian pathway is for the pedestrian, not for my car to be parked. Again, then there is a big confusion, like where do I park my car? Because buildings are, big malls come up right at the front of the, near the road, and there is no proper parking facility. That is another reality. Every building, if it is designed as per the existing building rules, then obviously it should be designed to cater to all the parking requirements. So now, because of this COVID, we have realized that our cinema theaters, our streets, the malls, which we thought were our pride, the supermarkets, everything, even the religious buildings, crores and crores of money we are spending on religious buildings, they are all just empty. We can't go there. People don't gather there. And we have only one final solace, that is our own home. But I'm not talking about the majority of the homeless people. Only for the fortunate ones, homes are a final place. But now look at the homes that we have designed and constructed and we are living. In cities, they are all very insular, especially minimalistic because of the land value, construction value, and you have to, buy it, purchase it. So especially in urban areas, they are mostly very minimalistic, minimum spaces. Maybe one balcony is a luxury. In certain places like Delhi and all, one or two balconies would be a luxury. Then they are like shoe boxes. Once in a while, you can peep out to breathe oxygen, breathe the nature's air or whatever. So they are less ventilated, single door entries, no verandas, and all the more everything is paved around so that the water doesn't splash into your car porch. So they are building up mini heat islands. Then look at our cities. Our cities are also like, the modern apartments. Apartments are designed, they are all, we think that they are all technologically successful. But the corona has again taught us one lesson, that you can't use common lifts. You can't use common stairs, launches. Maybe if you're using lift, you should use the voice recognition softwares. How many buildings in India have this voice recognition software? Then all the more there is central air conditioned buildings which cannot be put to use. So all our technological advancements have failed at some time I'm not saying that 100% is a failure. It has failed at some time when we are fighting with such deadly issues like corona pandemic and all. And very minimum balconies, you don't have a connect with what you actually require. Because if we look at ourselves, 99% of our evolution happened from this raw nature. It's only just a few percentage that is built up on the technology on which we are all relying upon. The rest of us is that raw nature or product of that raw nature. But then again, the problem is that we are all being tuned and trained to be like the men in the cave. This is an allegory which Plato has written in one of his writings, where he calls it the men in the cave. The allegory goes on like this. There are 4-5 men who are imprisoned in a cave from the time they were small. They have not seen what is happening outside because they are posed and chained in such a way that they can only see the interior of the cave. But there is a small opening on the other side, which is on the rear side of this man. So light comes from there, and whenever an animal moves or a bird chirps, they can see the shadow and then they relate to the sound. So for them, and they cannot twist and turn their heads so that they can look directly at the light and what is happening outside the cave. So the allegory goes on like this, that for them, what they see as shadow is reality. It ends like this. They were once they were unchained and they came out, and when they came out and they were forced to see the reality, they started looking at the shadow as reality and the reality as shadow. And why I said this now is that we have all created created people, our society, to see that, okay, living like this is the best. You should have your own house, fine. You should all be caged, fine. Minimum interaction with exterior, fine. But that doesn't suit our well-being. We have mastered the art of climate control architecture. If it is hot outside, we turn on our air conditioner and then we are cool inside, comfortable. But when you try to control climate, it has a lot of disadvantages. We have to respond to the climate and then we need to live. And for that, you can actually tolerate the bad effects of climate. But how you do that is all depends upon small things that we do in our life, which can become a big revolution. So the way to cope up this kind of stress, this kind of awful living, I would say, is to look at sustainability, but sustainability from the point of view of biophilia. What we need is good quality of life. We need the better environment. So we have to be sustainably. We should be, what do you say, judicious enough to make use of the resources. Then obviously economic growth should be there, because without economy, no generation can prosper. But for all this, everything, my opinion is that everything starts from home. And for this, let us now start looking at nature. As I said before, nature is the best teacher. And it's like an open book. It is there, but we need to open up and see. It doesn't give us recorded classes like how we give to our students, but it is there for us to see, observe, explore, and understand. These are all small birds and small creatures. We think they're very insignificant in our life, but there are big lessons. These are the animals and birds. They don't have any paper degrees like us. There is a basic instinct when it is time for them to look after, lay the eggs, or give birth to babies and take care of them. There is a basic instinct to build up a shelter, and they do it based on whatever natural resources are available. Again, it is basically meeting the need of the time, the need of the time. So nature itself has given some sort of what do you say, inbuilt lessons within these birds and animals, whether it is an ant or a hummingbird, that this is the way it should work on that particular biological time, to take care of the child, to deliver the child, or lay the egg, sit on the egg, rear the egg, and then for food storage for the baby till the time baby is strong enough to use the wings and fly away. So we have to look back at nature, and also we should teach our students to look back at nature and start learning from nature. There is something that I found interesting, which I thought I will share with you. Maybe you can share with your students also, because many of you would be from textile industry and you would be interested to discuss about the theory of design. This is one theory of design which I found in nature. It's a papaya tree, and I'm sure all of you would be liking papaya fruit and would have seen papaya trees, at least from down. But I have been lucky enough to see papaya tree from top, from the terrace. But the the mystery part of looking at a papaya tree from the top, which we call as a roof plan level, that is from the terrace, when you look down, if you can see a small papaya tree, it forms a beautiful spiral arrangement, the leaves. Now let us look at the DNA of the leaves, or even the DNA of the fruit. A small seed grows up to such a big plant, and then a tree. And the tree has got with many leaves, and every leaf has got a stick like this, and then it has got this green portion, which is almost like an open hand, begging for something, always open and begging for sunlight, and that is required for its food processing. Now if you start looking at it in detail, each one of these leaves which is begging for the sunlight is actually getting it, because the small DNA in the seed has guided the tree to have the leaves in a spiral arrangement. So that spiral arrangement enables all the leaves to get enough sunlight that is required. I say that is the most phenomenal example of nature to live judiciously. And this is just one small example. There could be many examples of, many things, many wonders that nature can give us if we are ready to open our eyes and explore and analyze. Then there is something that I have found interesting about animals. Why? The question is that, like, why do giraffes have small head? Why do giraffes have small head? Then I just compared it with the with an elephant. Elephant has got a large head, wide, what do you say, that those ears and a tusk, and then it's got its that whatever that long elongated nose, I forgot the name. Then now the question is that why the giraffe has got a small head, not the head as big as that of an elephant. I'm sure we would be wondering, like, it could be that elephants have to run fast, so if you have a large head, it would stoop down. Yes, that exactly is not the answer, but still, if you look at the structural formation of a giraffe, the neck is a cantilevered beam. We would call it, in construction, we call it a cantilevered beam. So the moment you have a cantilevered beam, the end cannot carry a lot of weight. Like, for example, if you ask me to carry a bottle full of water and then hold it like this for a long time, then my hand will start stooping down. But if there is no water in the bottle, just the bottle, then I can hold it like that for a long time. Same law of nature works here, because everything that you learn and use in the buildings, the construction is all lessons taken from nature. The moment it is cantilevered, it cannot carry a heavy weight like that of the elephant, so you require a small head. But if you look at Darwin's theory and try to relate, maybe people would say that it's the moment you started, stretching your head, stretching your neck, it has elongated. But I have a counter theory, that then why did they stop stretching the neck at that particular distance? Why not beyond that? So it's all the law of nature. There should be some curiosity to explore all this. So why am I saying this? That nature itself is an encyclopedia for every field, whether it's textile field, because I'm sure in textile design. Nature has played a major role in building up designs, and then even getting out the raw material. Everything is based on nature, because you cannot survive without nature in textile engineering. And it's not just mysteries alone that nature has. Nature has got a healing power. Like once you are being in nature or you're viewing the scenes of nature, our anger reduces, our fear reduces, the stress, and then it gives us a lot of pleasant feelings inside. So exposure to nature not only makes you feel better emotionally, but it also contributes to the physical well-being, not just emotional, but also physical well-being, by reducing the blood pressure, loosening up your muscles. Then it would lessen the production of stress hormones and give us more of dopamine, which is a happiness hormone. And it also reduces the heart rate. There are, what I've said is all taken from studies. There are various studies which prove that nature supports and improves our psychological well-being. A study on the cognitive benefits of nature found that the subjects who undertook nature walk, they had a better memory than the ones who were always tied up in an urban street. So compare the memory power of children who have grown in villages where they had lots of nature to move around and play and interact and get connected with, while the children who were all brought up as broiler chicken within the houses in urban areas had less memory than the ones who had uh, lots of nature to explore. Then nature walks, that is basically getting connected with nature, benefits people who suffer from depression, then various depressive disorders, because nature has got a immense power to uplift the mood. When we are exposed to nature, our moods changes and it gets uplifted. So not only that, but they also felt more motivated and energized to recover and get back to normalcy, the normal life. When you are exposed to nature and allowed to interact with nature, stay connected with nature, when you get back to your normal life, you feel more motivated and energized. Then recent investigations reveal that being outdoor reduces stress by lowering the stress hormone cortisol. And then it also makes us immune to various diseases like hypertension and tachycardia. So I would say that how can we be connected with nature? Maybe we are not privileged to be with nature always. So how can we stay connected with nature is something that we need to look for in biophilia. Then not only physical well-being or psychology, there is a spiritual enhancement also which nature can give us. By staying close to nature, we feel really grateful about what has been given to us. The fresh sunlight, when you open the window and you see the first ray of sunlight, you feel privileged and grateful that, oh, another good morning with the fresh sunlight inside. The moment you see water, clean, neat, plain water, then you feel grateful that you have water. You feel appreciative that there is good water for you. And then the moment you see raindrops or the dewdrops on the leaves, again it's a gush of dopamine, happiness hormone, which gives us a kind of spiritual enhancement. And then the moment we start seeing all these wonders of nature, there is always an urge for us to protect nature. If you see that a plant is withered off, and then there are certain fresh cuttings that can be taken out, then if you really have the time to spend, then you will bend down, cut the fresh cuttings, and then put it as different in different pots or in different parts of the ground. And the moment they start giving out new leaves, you feel immense happy. And that happiness is not just affecting your mind, it is also affecting the whole body, because you are reducing your stress levels just by looking at the growth that is visible to you. The growth of leaves, the growth of small buds flowering, everything gives us a spiritual enhancement. And the more time we spend outside, it is not just the visual, but all our five sensory organs gets healed up. The vision, the smell, the hearing of the birds chirping, then the touch, very important, because around 70 to 80% of human beings are touch people. So we need to feel the texture of everything that we have in nature, and that enhances our happiness with it. Yeah, this is what I said. 99% of our evolution happened in the natural world. So there is no way in which we can stay away from nature. We have to stay connected with nature. But unfortunately, as of now, 54% of the world's population live in an urban environment. Because people who are living in rural environment have some way or the other to stay connected with nature, because there is a lot of natural elements around. Like, for example, if you come to a village in Kerala, you will have a temple pond, you will have a banyan tree, and it's very interesting. If you take a religious visitation to a temple, you walk barefoot, you cross the, you go after having a bath, so your skin is ready to absorb all the positive energy around, the oxygen which is being given out by the banyan tree. The moment you take a circumambulation of the banyan tree, you feel enriched with oxygen. Then you move into the gravel paved pathway. There is a kind of acupuncture that is happening on your barefoot, which actually rejuvenates the body. The moment you smell the frankincense in the temple or a church or a mosque, then you feel rejuvenated. Then the moment you see Deeparadhana, I mean, that's the, the time where, the God will be made visible in a temple with all the light sound. It's actually a kind of pleasantry for the eye. So the whole body gets rejuvenated by a visitation of a temple or a church, any religious building, any religious structure for that matter, provided you understand it. It would happen within ourselves, but we should be able to realize it and make our body understand that this is what is happening, which is a better healing. But unfortunately, by 2050, it is estimated that 2/3 of the world's population will be in urban areas. So maybe people like you and me must be living in urban areas. And for us, how do we get connected with nature? And biophilia is the way in which we can stay connected with nature. It's not a new concept at all. Biophilic design is a concept which is used in all fields, starting from, I'm taking the case of textile here because this institution is a textile institution. Starting from textile institution to building industry, it is a concept that allows us to stay connected with the natural environment. The occupant will stay connected with the natural environment. It could be either by direct use of nature or indirect use of nature, or by space and place conditions. To look at the word biophilia, bio obviously means it's earth or nature, and philia is like a study of that, or derived from that. So this word was coined by social psychologist Erich Fromm in 1964 and was popularized by a biologist Edward Wilson in 1984. But if you look at maybe not in the form or in the terminology of biophilia, but our ancestors were living with these principles in mind, staying connected with nature. So for a biophilic design, there are various strengthening design practices that are available. They could be nature-based systems where nature itself will support. Then it could be engineering principles, where engineering principles would help us deliver a biophilic design within us. Then there could be certain design cues that we can take out to improve environmental quality, health, and efficiency. Can I just take 1 minute break because my power has gone off, so I have to switch over to another internet. Oh, power has come. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that break. So let us look at biophilic concept and how we can bring it in our lives. Biophilia simply helps us to stay connected with nature. That is, there is an urge in every human being to affiliate with other forms of life. And how do you do it in your design or in your own habitat is what biophilia tells us. Traditionally, if you look at our habitats, were all like a part of a nature. We were using environment friendly materials, eco friendly materials, but now in a modern lifestyle, we don't have a choice to go back to the traditional way of living, but we have to choose our own modern advanced technology with which we can construct buildings and live in those lines. So, but within those contemporary livable cocoons, I would call them cocoons, how best can we bring in nature? There are various concepts like green city movement and bringing in, a lot of greenery within the neighborhood, etc. But it should start at a level where your immediate doorstep should be connected with nature, and then from that doorstep it should be connected to the road that connects to the house, and then to the neighbor's house, and many neighbors' house together forming a neighborhood. And it is not just having greenery around, it is just when I say getting connected doesn't mean that visually you're seeing it. You should engage yourself with activities that support the biophilic living. And how do we do that is very important, because I can have a big garden that has been laid out, so visually I'm connected, half of the thing is done, but just by being visually connected doesn't take care of the whole biophilic living. We have to actively get engaged, by watering the plants, manuring, giving natural fertilizers to the plants, and also see whether they are growing. If they are growing, in fact, it is like maturing oneself with nature. And this design helps us to reconnect the occupants to the biome. Biome is the environment where we live, and then the building to the intrinsic carrying capacity of the site. So every site will have a carrying capacity. If you relate back to the ecological footprint, similarly, every site has got a carrying capacity. So to reduce or to minimize the ecological footprint, we need to get reconnected. All the occupants of the house should get reconnected to nature, and it is a holistic vision of restoring and reconnecting the ground. So the water that falls into your own campus, whether it is your office or your house, should percolate within that particular area so that you get a better groundwater recharge. So in biophilic design, we take care of very small things. It's not a big design, and I said it's not a new concept, but it is something which gives us a direct experience of nature. For example, how do we get direct experience of nature? Light. Our ancestors arranged all their activities of life during daytime so that when the sun goes down, they go to sleep. To the extent, if you look at the Vastu Shastric principle of room allocation, you have the sunrise in the east. So maybe if you have kitchen in the southeast or the northeast, you get advantage of the early morning sunlight. And that early morning sunlight provides UV rays which can disinfect your kitchen. And that's very important because you have to be very hygienic about your food. And if you come down by the evening, when the sun moves from east to west, our master bedrooms were provided in the southwest. So what happens? You still have the western sun. In Kerala, it is southwest because of the prevailing wind direction. So having the sun will help them because they don't have any other go. Maybe that's what you would say, but I would say that they could arrange all the activities starting from sunrise to sunset, and they could manage, and maybe a little time here and there were overlapped by using kerosene lamps or whatever. But now we have the technology with which we can create daylight even at 12 o'clock in the night. But that daylight which we create using the LCDs and all is not the perfect light that we need to experience to have a biophilic living. So the moment you open your window, the light that comes in refreshes you, the air that you breathe. If the immediate environment has been taken care of by the whole neighborhood, then the immediate air that you breathe gives us a good experience. Then the water, having a direct experience with nature by using water is another way of having a biophilic enhancement. Then plants, obviously animals, because we always say flora and fauna. Then the natural landscapes and ecosystems. And when all these things meet, the weather, the climate, the weather itself gets enhanced. So now let us look at this small picture which I am sharing with you. That contact with natural light, what do you get? It's very therapeutic. The moment you start experiencing the direct natural light, the sunlight, you get very positive energy within, and that reduces the stress, the blood pressure, and enhances the immune system. And that's why even during Corona period, people say that you have to come out for vitamin D. You have to stay in sun for some time so that that enhances your immunity, your immune system. Then there is another concept of circadian lighting. It is the electric light that can be used to support human health by minimizing the effect of electric light, because electric lights will always have a bad effect on human beings. So circadian lighting system is almost similar to that of daylight, which most of the, there is advancement in lighting systems. So this is getting popular. But the whole idea is that there are, we have three electric approaches for lighting systems. One is in circadian lighting system, one is the intensity tuning, second is the color tuning, and stimulus tuning. These three, when mixed in the right proportions, you get lighting system that is almost similar to that of the daylight. But that is again only similar, but not the same as that of the daylight or the light directly from the sun. But in hospitals and all, where you cannot provide direct light because of need for providing clean interiors, dust-free interiors, or germ-free interiors, then circadian lighting system helps. And it also regulates the sleep-wake cycles of patients and even normal people who don't have any diseases at home. So we need to look at daylight as a source for our emotional, biological health and well-being of people. Though, as I said before, though these could be all managed or manipulated using the technology, the best answer is always what we get from nature. So biophilic living will allow us to understand, enjoy, enhance, and transform the merits that we absorb from nature. So you can think of large window portals. It all depends upon, that's why we always say that it should be climate responsive. Depending upon the climate, if the exterior climate is not hot over the year, or maybe over 6 months of the year, then we can think of having large portals which bring in light and air. But if it's in desert climate, you cannot think of such large openings, because we have to always cut down the amount of heat that comes in along with light. Along with light, heat also gets transferred to the house. So maybe large portals may not work for a desert climate, but for any tropical region, a large window openings can bring in a lot of air. And if you want to cut the intensity of sunlight because of the intensity of light, then you can think of chajjas and other ways of jali works which can cut the light and then bring in beautiful shadow patterns again. And note that these patterns may resemble nature because they are all coming from nature. The light that is coming from nature is coming through the walls which we have created and then creating a beautiful pattern. And these patterns that you find on your courtyard, on the veranda, keeps on changing from day to day because the sun has got a different inclination every day. It keeps on changing for about 20 degrees. So that inclination gives us different kinds of patterns, which also actually enhances our well-being, looking at these patterns and enjoying the sunlight. So if you look at architecture from time immemorial, maybe from the historic time or even from the the Renaissance times, light has been used as a main source to create very dramatic interiors. The way in which diffuse daylight comes in has created very dramatic interiors which enhances. If you look at the history of church architecture, Renaissance architecture played a major role because they wanted to show that the kingdom of God is in this earth and it is there in this church. So they had used this daylight to create very dramatic interiors. And this dramatic interiors with the daylight plunging into the interior has got supreme healing power. And that healing power cures us. It's not any of the gods that are healing us. It's this power of nature in the form of light, air, water, wind, plants that are healing us. It's not the gods, or even if you look at medicine also, they can only support us, but the actual healing happens within our body, and we need to enhance the power of the body using the powers of nature. Then water is a very precious thing which can improve our health, improve our the ways in which we feel happy, we feel depressed, we feel cool, we feel charged up, and the life within it. The water as well as the life within it makes up a lot of changes within our well-being. And that's the reason, very reason why, and being connected with nature, it's not just viewing them from a far off distance. You got to touch them and feel them and experience the smell. For that, most of the contemporary buildings are designed in such a way that they all have green terraces. And these terraces are not just terraces which are a visual element, but they are all areas where people move in and interact. And it has been found that the output of the people, especially the company Google, has found out that with the new building biophilic design that has been brought into their design, and the employees being allowed to get themselves engaged with nature, they have increased their productivity. So having terraces like this where you plant lot of small, it could be even large bamboo trees can be planted because that much technological advancement we have reached. So it could be shrubs, herbs, and many types of plants. Like for interiors, we always look at various plants like pothos. Pothos, there are 3-4 varieties, more than 4. There are about 10 to 12 varieties of pothos, or what we call as money plant, which can be used as an indoor plant. Then jade plants, spider plants. Then we have aglonema, weeping fig. I mean, it could be like 30, 40 different species of plants that are available, even to the extent that we have plants which gives us oxygen throughout. That is CC plant or the rubber plant. Then there is Zanzibar gem, which requires watering only once a month. You just need to pot it and keep it in indoors. It requires only indirect sunlight. But seeing the plant giving up new shoots, and this formation of the shoot is very fast. One day you would see that there is a light green stem that has come out. which has been covered with small leaves, but you will see it only as a shoot. The next day you open up and you see that the whole branch is formed with all the leaves projecting out. So it's actually a mystery. I mean, you would be like waiting to see when it is blooming out, in the sense when the leaves are all, coming out of the central shoot. So this kind of, what do you say, the growth that you see in close quarters will help us enhance our happiness within, and then you feel uh, nice. And also these add-ons to these add-on to reduction in carbon dioxide. They take up carbon dioxide, so produces oxygen. So the small microcosm where you are living or where we are living is transformed by our interaction with nature, and thereby when this happens in multiple numbers, the whole environment changes. And the whole environment, there would be a reduction in carbon dioxide accumulation, production of more oxygen. Then people would be more happy, less of depression, less of hypertension. So all these contribute to our own well-being. So the greenery also brings down the local microclimatic temperature. For example, if you are out in the hot sun and if you find a tree like a ficus tree, that is banyan tree, or there are two varieties that you have for ficus, Ficus religiosa and Ficus bengalensis. Ficus bengalensis, that large banyan tree that we see on the roadside, while Ficus religiosa is the one that we see in religious places, in temples and all. So the moment you are in the hot sun, you have checked the temperature, and if you move towards the tree and sit under the tree, the temperature reduction is by 5 degrees Celsius. Just imagine, the trees can bring down the external ambient temperature by 5 degrees Celsius, bring down by 5 degrees Celsius. So if we have lots of greenery, we can together bring down the temperature of that microclimatic zone. And when many microclimatic zones bring down the temperature, for a macro region, the temperature comes down. It's butterfly effect. So thermoregulation and then acclimatization determine our tolerance and vulnerability to heat stress. So if we can regulate it and then slowly acclimatize ourselves to heat, then our tolerance will grow, and then we will not be stressed out with the external heat. But on the contrary, what we are doing is that when the external heat enhances or increases, we increase or reduces the temperature of our air conditioners, and these air conditioners gives out freons, which can actually affect our environment by breaking out the ozone layer, so on and so forth. It's not like you are adapting ourselves to the change in weather, but you are controlling again the internal climate, so that you feel comfortable for that particular time. But again, when you go out, it is again, you're not tolerated yourself, or you're not acclimatized yourself to the external temperature. Anyway, these are all individual factors which depends upon age, health, then our fitness, obviously genetics too. So, but still on a general scale, we are all comfortable within a narrow range of temperatures and atmospheric gas levels. But anyway, a slight change in that will create a lot of intolerance in us, and then we require environmental conditioning. But the best way to condition the environment is not by using machines, but by using these plants and this water and all these natural elements which don't have any side effects. Every species usually adapt to a climate change of about 1 degree Celsius for 1 million years. But we know the kind of global temperature hike that we are expecting in the next 100 years. So it's only 1 million year that will be taken. It is 1 million year that will be taken by a particular species to adapt to an enhancement of 1 degree Celsius. And now we are talking about 4 degrees temperature rise in the next 100 years. So God knows how many of us would exist and how many species, not us alone, but also the other species within the ecosystem exist if the temperature rises like this. So we have other methods like those who are not in our homes. If we don't have an access to seeing water and directly engaging ourselves with water, but by not providing a water pond or a pool, don't have enough space, then obviously indirect experience of nature counts. Like I have read in one of the journals that in Japan, after the people come back from work and they're stressed up, they switch on the TV and they have a particular channel, it seems, which just shows water and moving fishes in the water, which calms them down. So it has been proven by many researchers that if you don't have a direct experience of nature, then indirect experience of nature have like having images of nature, using natural materials. That's why we use a lot of bamboo finished products within the house to create a feel that you're close to nature. Then by using natural colors, like the color of the earth, the color of laterite, etc., to create an indirect experience of nature. Then like mobility and wayfinding, I always admire the works of architect late Padma Shri Laurie Baker, where he has actually gone a step ahead to bring in nature, to give direct experience of nature as well as give indirect experience of nature. He was always so mad about mango as a fruit. So many of his houses he designed for people. The floors you will find a mango, shape of a mango with broken tiles, which is made out of broken tiles. So we call it mango mania, but that is again a way in which you are staying connected with nature, having inscriptions or features that are from nature being depicted in the form of having colored tiles, using the colors that you find in nature, using cool colors, because nature has both warm and cool colors, but the warm colors are very less while the cool colors are more. So using cool colors within interiors can also give us an indirect experience of nature, and it calms us down. And that's the very reason why hospitals have mostly painted with cool colors to bring down the stress levels, as well as the and if you notice restaurants, they are mostly decorated with red colors because that actually enhances our adrenaline and you feel hungry. That's a theory, the color theory that they say, the red is a very it's a warm color, and it actually makes adrenaline gush within us, and then that makes us hungry, and so you eat a lot. That's a theory. So using cool colors, natural colors, then depicting signs from nature on the walls, on the floors, on the roof, on the ceiling, and so that you have an indirect experience of nature even when you are within the interiors. Then obviously cultural and ecological attachment to a place. You know the cultural background of a place, and then that's why when we go to different places, whatever small curios which are products of a particular culture, we try to buy and accumulate in our showcases, so that we feel that it can give us a indirect experience of that culture. And then we have been doing all this without knowing that this is all part of biophilic design. And then simulating natural light and air by see if there are no provisions in which I can have natural light. As I said before, circadian lighting system can be used, and that system can give us a light which is almost similar to that of natural light, and then use up ventilation systems which can give us air that is almost similar to that of natural air. Then beyond these small things that we could do within our homes, then architects and engineers have gone for naturalistic shapes and forms, like what we call as biomimicry, mimicking the biome, mimicking then mimicking the nature, that is biomimicry, taking forms which are very naturalistic or very organic and using them for large structures, then building up structures as if they imitate nature, imitate the forms of nature. But if you look at our history of construction from time immemorial, even the way in which uh, the Egyptians built their temples, the acanthus leaves that they used to depict on the walls, on the capital of the pillars, the same leaves, similar graphic design would be seen in the dresses. So we have always been part and parcel of nature, and we have borrowed many things from nature. So there is no existence for us leaving apart nature. So there is only one way. It's just being with nature and then having an informed understanding that this is one way of bringing in biophilia within ourselves and thereby in our lives. Then using natural geometries, like for example, what you see as the Esplanade Theatre Singapore is a mimicked form of a beehive. So architects or engineers have designed structures imitating natural forms. It could be even a termite hill. It could be a beehive. And see, there are a lot of advantages, like what I said about the giraffe and the cantilevered neck. These beehives have a lot of structural stability, which has been mimicked from nature onto huge structures, thereby creating an indirect experience of nature. So biophilic design features can extend the effect of exposures or memories of exposures. If it is direct contact, direct connect, then it is a direct exposure to nature. But indirect experience can also evoke a memory of an exposure, which helps us build a better established neurobiological pathway. There is one example that someone might experience a reduction in mental fatigue during a walk in a woodland, coming back to office, but on their return they might reconnect with those feelings, or while at the office also they try to reconnect with the feelings, the chillness that you got while a cool air brushed through your body. So that way you can reconnect it with the memory. So that also helps. It's not just direct exposure alone, but the memories that we carry. And that's a very pertinent point where we have to slow down and experience it. We need to experience the chillness that is obtained by a cool air, so that becomes a memory for us, and then that memory can evoke the same feeling or a similar feeling while we are not at all at that particular site. We are in a totally different environment. So this way in which those memories are rewinded within ourselves can also help us heal our body and our senses, rejuvenate our senses, and once the senses are rejuvenated, then it helps in healing. So this is again some buildings which were designed and constructed based on natural geometry. There was one great architect, Antonio Gaudi, late back in 1800s, who designed the Sagrada Familia. It's a church, huge church in Gothic style. I think it was in the 17th century, Gothic style, where he had used the form of an anthill as a basic inspiration to build, because he wanted to connect his building with that of nature. So he looked at various anthills or the termite hills and then abstracted concept from anthills, how they build it up. Because you would have all seen, like, anthills are all broader at the space placed near the ground, while it goes up, because that's the only way it can have a structural stability. It narrows out and then it will have spikes, because they all shun sunlight, so they have to hide themselves from the direct sunlight. So this particular architect have been inspired by these biomorphic forms, and then he has tried to use that or similar concepts in his designs. You can see that even in the details of Casa Milan, Casa, various palaces which he has designed, apartments he has designed. So nature can be an inspiration, not only for living, but also for designs like this. This Henry David Thoreau, who has said, like, if you have a decent or beautiful house, what is the use of a beautiful house if you don't have a decent planet to build it on or to keep it on? So we have kept our own immediate environments neat and clean, but the planet we are not bothered. So how do we cope up with, or how can we go? How can we be happy and satisfied having a beautiful house if we don't have a decent planet to put it on? Biophilic design supports low energy buildings to diminish drivers of climate change. That's very important, that whatever parameters that enhances the climate change or increases the climate change, devastates our climate, can be brought down by using low energy buildings, which can be built using biophilic design. So if we have an external living wall which can cool the facades, so we are talking about double walls. You have an external wall, it could be even a set of pergolas with creepers on it, which will prevent direct falling of sunlight on the wall, because the wall, when it is exposed to direct sunlight, it absorbs heat during daytime, and through conduction it comes to the interior, and through convection it re-radiates the temperature or the heat that it has absorbed to the interiors during night. That's how our building gets heated up. So if you have extreme heat, external living walls can be protected by having cool facades. It could be pergolas, and that's one reason why, if it is, see, for India, we have the south and the west, which gets maximum heated up because of our geographical location. So these two portions, the south as well as the west, can be provided with external verandas, and these verandas can be covered by having pergolas. These pergolas can be roofed. If you don't want a covered one, then they could be just creepers growing on top of that. So the wall gets shaded, and when the wall is shaded, the temperature that falls, or the direct sunlight that falls on the external wall reduces, thereby reducing the absorptive capacity of the wall, and then re-radiating capacity of the wall at night, thereby bringing down the temperature. So basically, like, bringing in small interventions in the design, you can reduce the temperature that gets into the house. And also by incorporating some design measures, like avoiding fully paved compound, because you don't want small grass to grow over here and there. You don't want any natural snakes or something to come into your house, etc. What we do is we provide tiles all over, but these tiles are like mini heat islands, which heat up during daytime, and then at night they just radiate back the heat, which gets accumulated within your own building, with your own immediate environment. So by interfering, using nature cover, green cover, the plants that can, plants like small ivy plants which can grow as a creeper, because grass and having lawn could be quite time consuming. You require a gardener to manage. If you have a large chunk of lawn, with a small chunk we can manage, but if you don't want to spend that time also with manuring the lawn, and then taking care of it, or you don't have the time or the energy, then you can even think of small ivy plants which creeps over and then provides a green layer. But instead of having a tiled exterior, which will not allow water to trickle down to the groundwater, join with the groundwater, and also on the other hand, it increases the temperature by absorbing all the day sunlight, and then radiating it back at night, creating mini heat islands within our own neighborhood. Then if we can design appropriate facades, appropriate window openings, open plan, daylight can meet all the daylight requirement that you require for visual comfort. And then it can also reduce the electricity and the cooling cost. Then operable windows provide natural ventilation. It can enhance comfort, and it can also reduce the need for mechanical filtration circulation. And one more thing, if the latest thing that we propagate is vertical gardens. If you don't have enough ground cover, then you can always think of vertical gardens. And the advantage of having vertical gardens along the compound wall or having creepers grown along the compound wall is that these creepers will become a beautiful filter if the wind that comes into your house, the air or the breeze that comes into the house carries a lot of dust or girts, small tiny things, girts. Then these green compound walls, rather than having masonry compound walls, if we have green compound walls, these green leaves work as a filter and filters the dust, and then gives you dust-free air, which these operable windows will invite in, so that you get the whole interior ventilated without any mechanical filtration or circulation. But certain areas like hospitals, as I said before, would not appreciate this kind of natural ventilation, because it should be crisp and clean, neatly done, because we are talking about dust free, but there could be microbes and other things that should not enter into certain sterile phase. So where we don't have any other choice but to go for mechanical ventilation. So the energy that would be spent for such activities, which are part and parcel of our common living, should be given mechanical support, while the things that we can manage on our own should be provided with natural systems. And then there have been many studies which says that if we have contact with natural elements through views, materials, even by using granite walls, or if you have a certain stone cladded walls, you're feeling the texture of natural stone, there is a kind of healing that happens, which is salutogenic. So it's basically health and genesis of health. Salute is health. So it's a genesis of a rebirth of health. So this can be used for recreation and relaxation, especially in certain buffer areas where you need not think about having spick and span clear environment. And then it could be an individual stress buster as well as for the community. Yeah, these are the patterns which are created in space. On to the right side, what you see is a pattern created by nature itself, and onto the left side is created by a built form with a large facade having openable and closed windows. But these patterns keep varying, and if we have the time and energy to watch these patterns change throughout, because why I say it changes, because 12 hours we get sunlight, and the same inclination we may not get the next day. So it keeps on changing, the patterns keeps on changing, and these patterns can relieve our stresses, and we feel jubilated while watching these. And then tactility is also very important. Touch interventions can tune our urban micro climates, like small having, if there is a, I still remember like how exalted I felt when I went to Pune, where Osho, there is one a canal which is a very dirty canal. The moment it enters into the compound of Osho, a spiritual leader, I'm not supporting any of the teachings as such or not propagating, but that particular act of converting that Ganda Nala, that dirty Nala, into a beautiful garden and a beautiful stream by providing certain filtering systems, natural as well as mechanical, has created an immense change And at one particular point, you can see the dirty water as well as you can see the beautiful stream that runs through. And it also gives us a kind of excitement. So certain interventions like this within the campuses where we can play with some water that comes out of a dirty canal can be converted into a clean water and can be reused for as grey water for watering purpose for the plants. The storm water that comes out of large areas, um, maybe from the bathing areas of the hostels, etc., can be uh, filtered using natural, because there are many reeds which help us um, rejuvenate this water and recycle this water and use it as grey water for landscaping. So all these, if they are made visible also, one thing is that we are protecting water, preserving what is very precious, and at the other end you are also seeing that something that is dirty is being getting cleaned. So there is a psychological feeling that okay, you are also part of that clean environment where something dirty is getting cleaned. That gives in a psychological wellness within ourselves. So that kind of, and also the sound of that water falling, and maybe if you keep some stones next to it, if you have a small water flowing from one level to another, it need not be a big waterfall as such, but just from one higher level to a smaller level, you can just keep a lot, some pebbles, and the sound of water touching the pebble and falling into another level also heals us. So that is also part of biophilia, where you are experiencing two natural materials creating a music when they are next to each other. So this gives us a kind of sensorial experience, and not only sensorial experience, but also a kind of perception that, okay, there is stability in everything. Uh, and there is a refuge where you can go back to. And there is some protection, some safety, which is very much necessary for every human being. Knowingly or unknowingly, we are all looking forward for stability and also refuge. That's why when Corona came up, um, whether there is lockdown or there is no lockdown, we felt that home is the best, safest place, because that is a place of refuge. Then making use of such transition spaces. Many of the designs are constructed in such a way that there are transition spaces. But these spaces are all part and parcel of an architectural acumen. Beyond that, we have to feel it as a transitional space which is healing us, which we have to experience directly or indirectly, because it's a biophilic element that has been introduced. So how can these plants heal us, and how can I get connected with this? So that urge has to come from us, and we have to make use of it. That is very important. Then, as I said before, texture is also an important element in biophilia, where you feel connected with nature. So such textural qualities, even when the sunlight falls in, it creates a pattern, and the pattern provides a texture depending upon the base on which the pattern is formed. So all this add to our wellness. Then obviously they contribute, as I said before, contribute to the individual's mental, emotional, and hence the social health of a community. So we normally think of our house and its immediate compound, but now we are going little outside the compound as a communal space. So we can think of having communal gardens or green roofs, communal spaces, atria, gardens, and then there could be social interaction with people, which is also part of, because human beings are all part of nature. So interacting with human beings is something which we would have already understood by seeing each other just on this online mode, and then being at class interacting with students on a face-to-face system is much more fulfilling than teaching or speaking to students, communicating with students on a laptop or on a mobile. So that kind of communal spaces can be created, and all the biophilic elements that we were talking about can be brought in communal spaces, and also the understanding about using them and how they heal should also be there, because all these are there, were there, but the understanding and experiencing it is more important than being there. That's why biophilia goes a step beyond sustainability, where sustainability talks about or creates the infrastructure. Sustainability creates an attitude to preserve the resources of nature, resources of our earth, so that a future generation can also have their own share. But biophilia goes a step ahead, where we are healing ourselves not by sacrificing. Sustainability calls for sacrificing a lot of things, but biophilia says that it is not sacrificing, but you are engaging yourself with nature for your own good, not for the next generation's good, but for your own good. And when such thoughts are propagated, and a large community comes to know about it, then obviously the health, the mental health, the physical health of that community improves, and thereby the well-being of their community too improves. And it is very important to understand. See, the first step is to get ourselves engaged with nature, have a direct connect with nature. And the moment you have passed that step of having a direct connect with nature, then the second thing is that understanding the biodiversity, like how it becomes a cyclic system, and how do you favor that cyclic system of a small worm to a butterfly to a pollen grain to a flower to a breeding plant. So that next level of understanding should also come into our mind. So exposure to natural environment benefits emotional, physical, cognitive, and social development in children and adults at a time when communities need enhanced support to manage. So this is the right time where we need a lot of support to manage stresses, environmental and physiological and psychological stresses uh, related to climate change, as well as related to what we thought as our normal thing, to the new normal. So finally, interventions that support biodiversity contribute directly or indirectly to human health, but we should understand that they contribute, and so we should live with the rhythm of nature, understanding the rhythm of nature. So given the potential impact on the energy balance of the site, biophilic interventions may require deliberate and careful continuous turning of the cost and the value. You cannot see when you are in the design field, you can create lot of biophilic elements and put it for sale, and people can buy it and go. But more important is that even that should be understood from nature's point of view, the costing and the value, and also uh, how much the people would value it for owning it and then using it, because biophilia depends upon our connect with nature, whether it is direct natural element or indirect natural element. Yeah, these are some pictures which show how nature has been brought in different designs. Then biophilic design also supports species diversity and their preservation, like understanding each species. And because nature has given us a lot of species of flora and fauna, but the existence of each flora and fauna is dependent on the other. So it is a web. So how these webs are connected should be understood, and then there should be education programs which support these webs. Otherwise, if a few species belonging to the web are destroyed, then obviously that web will be disrupted, and that will again will not fulfill the whole picture that we are looking for in biodiversity. Yeah, this is the office of Google, where they have incorporated biophilic design and have found that the productivity of the occupants enhanced by bringing in these sort of innovative techniques of connecting the occupants or their employees with nature, not just by providing a visual connect, but also allowing them to grow along with the biophilic elements. This is another picture which shows how a biophilic element can be brought in within the living area where you can have a direct connect with nature. So, in a nutshell, biophilia or biophilic design emphasizes on the human adaptations to the natural world. So, it gives us a lesson how we have adapted ourselves to the natural world. Then it depends on repeated and sustained engagement. Having them within us, having plants within the house or having them in our neighborhood will not take up the case. We should have a sustained engagement with them and also should live and grow with them. So we should see how they grow, spend time with them, and then get ourselves engaged with them. It's a reconnect with nature, which is very much required for our well-being. And then biophilic design reinforces and integrates design interventions that connect with the overall setting of space. Then it fosters emotional attachments to certain settings, like certain corners of the house where you have created a small habitat within, how that habitat grows and how emotionally attached you will be to that setting is very important. And that also matters in our well-being. So altogether, biophilic design fosters positive and sustained interactions and relations of people with that of our nature. So successful application of biophilic design depends on adopting a new consciousness towards nature, and most important is recognizing how much of our physical and mental well-being continues to rely on the quality of our connections to nature. So that understanding is very important, not setting the stage for biophilic design, but that understanding that these are all pillars of strength on which my psychological, my physiological, and my emotional well-being is dependent on. So our connections to nature beyond ourselves, of which we are still a part of it. So biophilic design not only makes a positive environmental statement, supporting sustainability, engaging with urban greening initiatives, but also works on human-centric principles. So it's good for you and me, leveraging the social goods. When it is good for you and me, it is good for the community. And when it is good for the community, it is good for the whole humanity. And that's why it said there is only one master, which is nature. So I sum up that see, mostly everything that comes up in life is I take it as if it is a problem, there is a solution, and there is a design to solve that problem. So solving a problem in context, then the context is only nature. Living is a problem, then living in nature with that context of nature is the problem that we need to solve. Green lost, we have to regain. It becomes very important and pertinent for each one of us to be the apostle to regain the lost green. So by even whether it's a government policy or it is a central policy, state policy, or even the engineer, it is not just providing a constructed facility, but it should be providing a sustained engagement with nature, which designers cannot do. Designers can only set up a stage for us, but we have to go a step ahead of that and get ourselves engaged with nature. So such transformation of our homes can have a butterfly effect of transforming our neighborhood, our community, region, and then our continent. Now, the only question that I want to leave with you is that can we spearhead that revolution of change first at our home, then in my neighborhood, then in my community, and then make aware that biophilia is one concept that is going to be an alternate medicine for all of us. And if biophilia can make you happy, can bring down your stress, can bring down your levels of depression, can cool you down, then why not? Because that doesn't have any negative effect as such. So buildings where we all live are not just expressive sculptures which are neat and clean where we live, but they are all part and parcel which support. That's why it said, no, you shape your buildings and later buildings shape you. So if the buildings and the environment is going to shape me, then what should be the shape that I want? What should be the level of wellness that I want from this, my built environment as well as my unbuilt environment? So the places where we live can give us hope, it can heal. And that healing, let it be with nature. Now the question is, will you roll the dice? Because only if you and me take part in this revolution of making people understand what biophilia is and how to stay connected with nature. It's a very simple concept, not a new concept, but if that concept is instilled from the childhood to the students whom we get at an adult age and to the elderly ones in our community, then obviously we are all taking part in a revolution. And that revolution is going to change the world. And that change is going to be beneficial not only for human beings, but also for all the species of life in this ecosystem. I conclude by just saying a small story. It's about Taj Mahal, the building of Taj Mahal. The story goes on like this. While Taj Mahal was getting built, there was a traveler who used to travel and see places. So while he was traveling, he saw, obviously, it's a story that is black and white. While he was traveling, he saw that there were people who were having stones and some tools in their hand, trying to do something with the stone. So he was a very inquisitive person, and so he went close to one um, person who was cutting, I mean, obviously cutting stone, and then asked him, "Are bhai, aap kya kar rahe ho? My dear brother, what are you doing?" Then this person who was cutting the stone, maybe he was not happy that day. He looked at him, he stared at the traveler, and then he said, "Dekh rahe hai na, main patthar kaat raha hu. Can't you see? I'm cutting stone." So the traveler was happy. I mean, he asked a question, he got an answer. He was not very happy. He moved to the second person who was also cutting stone. So then he asked the same question, "Are bhai, aap kya kar rahe ho?" Then he says that, "Can't you see I'm cutting stone?" So story goes on like this. There are about 10 to 15 people who were doing all this, the same thing. And then they all gave the answer that, "Can't you see I'm cutting stone? Dekh rahe na, main patthar kaat raha hu." So finally, this traveler reaches a person who was smiling and cutting stone again. So this person goes next to him and asks him the same question. "Are bhai, aap kya kar rahe ho?" Then he says that, "I'm building Taj Mahal, for which I'm cutting stone. For which I'm cutting stone." So the difference is that I'm building Taj Mahal. So he knows that he is doing a bigger job rather than just cutting stone. All 15 people were cutting stone, but this man was knew that he was not just cutting stone, but he was building Taj Mahal, for which he was cutting stone. So the moral of the story is that, see, we are all into doing something, maybe building up a generation of students who are tomorrow going to be big people, or people who would be spearheading maybe some revolutions or whatever. But are we all having the attitude that I am cutting stones to build up this Taj Mahal, and is this Taj that I'm building? So that is the moral, that are we, it's just an attitude of approaching work, approaching life. So if it's just a small Taj Mahal, why not we look at biophilia and look at it as getting a constant connect with nature? Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you, Madam, for your wonderful session. Ever since we started these sustainability lectures right from Monday, we are getting scared every day. Someone is saying 2030, someone is saying 2015, but the days are not very far where we will be having problem in living in this world. And rightly said, the Mother Earth, she is cleansing herself. Maybe the pandemic, today we all are here, don't know next wave what will happen to us, but then Mother Earth is cleansing, reducing the weight, that way we can say. Any questions, like the participants? It was a very nice session. So,
Thank you. There were power fluctuations, so I was getting distracted. I'm sorry for that.
that's okay, it happens to everyone.
Because whenever there is a power fluctuation, I have to switch over the, net connection. So I was getting stressed.
Thank God everything went very well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm just thanking God.
सबको अनम्यूट कर दीजिए दर्पण जी अगर
Yeah.
किसी को कुछ बोलना है
Participants may unmute themselves now. I've unmuted them now.
अगर किसी को कुछ क्वेश्चन पूछना है तो पूछ सकता है मैडम से. No questions.
Yeah, maybe see, it's a very simple thing. Everybody understands it, and maybe many of us, live also like that.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am, for the strong, detailed presentation, stressing the importance and needs of biophilic approach. You have well-rounded everything in an engaging manner, and I must say there was never a dull moment. As ma'am has pointed out, the COVID lessons truly reflects the need to choose a close connection with nature. And biophilic design can bring a small wildness, biodiversity, and connection to each other while we are indoors. And we understand that it's not just an approach to architecture that is beneficial for the planet, it's also an approach that allows us to celebrate all that is good about being alive. And in doing so, we become a better, healthier, and happier version of ourselves. And we know that we are a planet at the crossroads now more than ever. So let's make it a priority to switch to biophilic designs. Thank you very much, ma'am, for this wonderful, insightful session. And I'm very sure this session has triggered some new biophilic ideas that we can incorporate in our lives as well. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you for your
Thank you,
patient listening.
Mabel. Thank you,
Hello,
Mabel,
ma'am.
for summing up.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone
Thank you,
else
madam.
would
Thank
like
you.
to say something? Anyone else? Annapurna, would you like to say something? Annapurna, your window is blinking, that's why I asked. Would you like to say something?
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Binamol, for accepting our invitation. You are a very busy person, I know. Still,